So we all know that since 1992 and later, there has been a focus in India on growth, which is fine, because we are looking at growth of the gross domestic product. And the expectation is that this will reduce poverty. And that has not been fully realized. There are many other problems with a focus exclusively on GDP. Things like sustainable development, inclusive growth have been talked about. Now, I'm going to distinguish between sustainable growth and sustainable development. These are two different things. The term sustainable growth means that the growth path in the last decade, around 8.5% on average, decreased in the last 2 years. They say it's 6.5, whatever that may be. The focus, if it is on maintaining that rate of growth in the future, that's what we refer to as sustainable growth, maintaining that growth in the GDP in the future. On the other hand, sustainable development is different. Inclusive growth is again different. By inclusive growth, which was one of the base themes of the 11th plan, we are talking about growth for all sections of society. But we are still retaining our interest in growth. And we are saying, how can this growth help the poorer sections? That's the whole idea when we talk about inclusive growth. As far as economic sustainability is concerned, or sustainable development is concerned, that is slightly different. Starting from 1992, the first Rio conference, we've had the second one in 2012 very recently, there has been talk of sustainable development. So can the high rates of growth be sustained was the first one. But economic sustainability is about maintenance of present consumption standards in the future. It may have dimensions other than just maintaining the high rate of growth. What sustainable development is about is that in the future, can we have the same kind of standards of living as we have in the present? So typically economists say that if you have a capital, if you maintain your capital stock, you are going to be able to have the same kind of living standards in the future. This has been extended in the context of the environment to include things like natural capital. So it is the capital, the definition of capital is a different dimension, and it has to do with specific scarcity of specific natural resources. Because traditionally, economists have not included capital in their definition, natural capital in their definition of capital. As some of you may know, capital is just those goods and goods which we use for future production, machinery, tools, things like that. But recent developments argue that natural capital is also a part of this whole notion of capital. Natural capital provides some services, and therefore that has to be maintained. And those are the concepts of sustainable development which we are talking of. Just to sort of give you an idea, if any of you have any questions, I'm also happy to address those questions as we go along. But towards the end, we will keep about 15 minutes for interaction, and that will be when you can ask your more substantial questions. If there are clarificatory questions, you are welcome to ask them as we proceed. Now, that is one part of the story. Now, am I on the same page on both? So this was what I was actually talking about just now. Sustainable development, the Rio conference brought it into focus. Some people claim that this sustainable development is impossible to talk of. And recently we have been talking about green growth. Now, the latest term that has entered the lexicon is green growth. We had sustainable growth, we had sustainable development, we had inclusive growth, and now it is green growth. By green growth, we mean that you can have growth of a kind which is not necessarily harmful to the environment. That is the challenge that some of us in developing countries face. Can we really have a growth which helps, which may not be a very high rate of growth, but which uses natural resources in a manner such that you also have what is called the natural capital is kept intact. Now, how do you operationalize this green growth? And a large part of this operationalization is about trade-offs and synergies. Trade-offs and synergies. Did I change that one? Yeah. Now, trade-off is when you have more of environment and less of growth. That is, you protect your forests, you protect your water resources, you have biodiversity, but at the same time, you are at a low level of equilibrium. So maybe income is not increasing at the rate at which you would want to, or human well-being is at a low level. There is a trade-off. That is one argument. The other argument is that both these can go together. You can have biodiversity with livelihoods, especially of the poor, being protected. So you have a kind of inclusive growth for the poor together with development that can be done. Now that is the argument. You have to identify the stakeholders and so on. In the 1990s or so, synergies were being talked about a great deal. Livelihoods and biodiversity. There were a large number of studies, both in India and other places. South Africa experiments about this are quite well known, where it was said you preserve your biodiversity and you have livelihoods. So livelihoods are created with biodiversity. For instance, tourism can be there. There is even timber, non-timber forest products and so on. So you can have limited kinds of livelihoods with biodiversity, and the kinds of livelihoods and development that you can have with biodiversity, there was a synergy. There is also a synergy when pollution reduction technologies provide employment creation. This is more to do with technology. If you have pollution reduction technologies which provide employment creation, that's another synergy. But in the present state of affairs, especially now, the trade-offs are coming more into the picture. Look at the whole argument in the media and also elsewhere on mining and ecology. The Western Ghats expert ecology panel has given its report. It tried to say that mining should be restricted to certain zones. So you have some zones which are ecologically fragile, like the Western Ghats, which has been declared by the UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. At the same time, you have mining there in some parts. So the Western Ghats Ecology Experts panel said that you have to have a zoning, and the focus is now on these kinds of trade-offs. So, but the states, especially Kerala and Karnataka, have written to the central government saying that they cannot accept this kind of zoning and that they would like to go ahead with mining plans and so on. So this is a trade-off. So where do you go? What kind of a pattern of development do you think of when you think of green growth? can you have even sustained growth or even development, maybe not green growth. So we have to look at each of these in a different context. And where is the trade-off? Now, my argument today is going to be that in the context of ecologically fragile regions, the minimum we can do and what we should be targeting at is that in the context of ecologically fragile regions, we have different development strategies. Do I make some sense? Am I sort of, is there any question at this point of time you would like to ask? Because we'll move into a particular case. The point I've made so far is the trade-offs between environment and development are becoming more and more important now, or are at least getting a whole lot of limelight. The main example, mining and ecology. I'm going to now say, okay, you can have another alternative paradigm of development and take the state of Himachal Pradesh as an example and look at hydropower and a few other things in the context of the state of Himachal Pradesh. Now look at Himachal Pradesh. It is a state, you know, I mean, this is, you know where Himachal Pradesh is located in India, all that we know. So I'm going to just give you some background about Himachal Pradesh and say that it is well located now to think of whether we call it green growth, whether we call it an alternative paradigm of growth, and so on. So let us see what we are talking of. The rate of growth of the state economy has been higher than the national average ever since the 7th plan, and it has been 8.8%. So Himachal Pradesh is a state which has a high rate of growth. Then in addition to that, the state's targeted growth rate was 8.9%, and it continues to be higher than the national average. So Himachal Pradesh is a good example. It's not one of the poorest states. And if you look at the development indicators, it's doing very well. It has registered a decline. Then it has a literacy rate which is 77.13%, 86% for males and 68% for females. So it has high literacy rates, it has a high growth rate. The literacy rate is much higher than India, and it is improving. It is claimed to have reached 100% literacy. We don't know whether that's a right claim, but it's saying that. So in the future growth scenarios for Himachal Pradesh, it's a state where you have development, you have had growth, you have development. So it is at a point in its strategy or in its planning where it can think of alternative paradigms of growth. So here is a state where, but even so, future growth is concentrated on 3 sectors. If you look at the development plans of Himachal Pradesh, they are looking at power, industry, and tourism. Their growth strategy is similar to that in other states. You want more industry, you want more power, you want tourism because of the natural advantage that it has in tourism. But positive and negative externalities of this strategy are not being looked at. I'm going to argue that you can have, we did a study on this 2010, 2011, and we are going to say that there are some links, whether this is not environmentally sustainable. There are other ways of looking at development. There may be a small cost to it, but it will be a cost which the poor, it will be inclusive and sustainable development. The poor will benefit, the people who are in the state will benefit from it. And we are going to argue that even if you reduce the targets for, let us say, power and other things. Let me explain as we move on now. Uh-huh. Pardon? Yeah. You have a question? Yes.
Ma'am, this Himachal Pradesh is a hill states, and I just like to know whether this is a true sample of other hill country district like Uttarakhand and Kashmir, because what I understand, I know from a general layman point of view, it is called post office economy over there. They don't have proper a proper system of economy. They have to come to place to earn this thing and send money over there. So is Himachal Pradesh different from others, Uttarakhand and others? Or
it is definitely different from Uttarakhand. Himachal Pradesh is more developed in the sense of literacy, in the sense of roads and so on. And that is why my argument that it is at a juncture where it can think of trade-offs. It can think of things like, I'll talk of the trade-offs as I move along. Now this is again something about Himachal Pradesh, and you have the extrapolated population. The important thing here is that the rate of growth of population is also decreasing in Himachal Pradesh. So in terms of the theory of demographic transition, there is a small decrease in the rate of growth of population. So both literacy and population wise, it is in a good situation. The net sown area is very small. It is mainly forests. We know this, that wherever there is irrigation, 92% of this is minor irrigation. So the agriculture is not a big part. Forests are a big part of the total state. Here you will find that there is, that's the other thing. Now forests are important, and the quality of the forest cover is deteriorating. This is not so important, so I skip this one. The soil, the important thing, this will all hang together once I talk about hydel power. There is a problem of soil erosion in the upper catchments in Himachal Pradesh. 67 to 68% of the area has steep or very steep slopes. Several rivers traverse, and the state has tremendous hydel power potential. We all know this. So given the hydel power potential in Himachal Pradesh, one strategy for development has been to have a whole lot of hydel power projects there. We are going to look at the trade-off and synergy between hydel power generation and preservation of some national, not all, some national parks. I am going to say where we should substitute one for the other, which will result in an increase in tourism income and other things. So the question is, should we conserve or should we produce more power? Is there always a trade-off? We'll do that by taking three sectors: the power sector, the industry sector, and the tourism sector. And we have taken data from 1980 onwards to try and prove some of these things. Now here we do it using a partial analysis